Okay, I think that we're ready. So welcome everybody. We're very pleased to have Andrej Umansky tonight to give us a very important lecture about the persecution of homosexuals during the Holocaust. So many things that we still need to learn about the Holocaust, and so many topics that we need to reach out to the young generation, especially in these times that we're living in. Here in France, we know from the French government that 3 groups are targeting today and getting a lot of violence: the Jews, the Roma, and the homosexuals. So I think that it's very important that we continue teaching about the consequences of what was the Holocaust, and the consequences of all these crimes the Germans committed against all these minorities and all these groups of people because they were different. And it helped new generations to be more tolerant and build a better society without violence. So thank you very much for joining us to this conference tonight. And Father, I want to introduce Dr. Andrej Umansky.
So it's my honor to introduce Andrej Umansky. Andrej is both an academic, he's co-teaching with me in Georgetown and also teaching in Germany. He's also a lawyer. But he has the quality, I would say, to be both on the ground and both in the archives, but very rare today. And so we are proud that he has chosen himself to introduce this difficult topic with about the persecution of homosexuals during the regime of Hitler. Sometimes it's a taboo subject because it has incidences about today. He will explain you what happened during the war, before the war, but also, unfortunately, after the war. I give you the floor, Andrej.
Thank you very much, Father Dubois. Yes, I'm very glad to talk today about this topic. I chose this topic not by hazard. I did it because when I studied law as a young student, it was by chance that I encountered the topic to the persecution of homosexuals, not during wartime, but after World War II. Because what I didn't know was that decades of years in Germany, being a homosexual man and having relationships with other men was forbidden by law. It was criminal. But when you're a student and you go to law classes, nobody is teaching you about this. You don't talk about sexuality and crime during classes. You're talking about all kind of topics, but not this. And it was by hazard that I found an old book, an old commentary. We call this in Germany, well, big books, commentaries on criminal law and articles. And I found this old commentary and the article 175. We'll deal with it later. That puts under a prohibition a sexual relationship between men. And I couldn't believe it that until the 70s, this article existed and it was illegal, and you could go to jail only because you were in a relationship with a man, as a man. So, and I tried to understand it. I read more and more. And what I found out was that until 1990, it was still forbidden in some cases in Germany. So this is why I started to interest myself. What happened to the homosexuals after the war, but as well during the war, and which evolution had we in Germany when it comes to homosexuality. So what I tried to show you today is a quick overview of what went on in Nazi Germany and give you the big outlines in this country. So first of all, what happened before the war? What is interesting is that before the war, there were already a criminal article that forbade homosexuality in Germany, but it wasn't enforced. You could live out your homosexuality in Germany before the war quite easily. So, for example, you see this picture of a couple in Berlin in the 20s, the Weimar Republic, and it was quite usual for homosexuals go outside. You could go in homosexual bars or clubs without without having any problems with the police or anybody else. It was tolerated. There were some cases, but the police and the prosecution's office weren't interested in this topic, in this issue. So that means that especially in Berlin, but as well in other cities like in Köln, where I'm right now, you had a big community, gay community, men and women. At that time, those people would call themselves Freunde, friends. This was the main name for them. And so, for example, in Berlin was founded as well the very first gay magazine in the world, who was called Der Eigene. So you see here a cover from that time. And again, it's a good example that even at that time, when you see what was going on in that country, Berlin was in Prussia, it was in East Germany, and it was still a very conservative state, as well when it comes to moral. And on the same time, you had as well all those liberal tendencies. So you had the right, and you could live your homosexual life as a man and as a woman quite freely, compared even to other countries in Europe. So it was this antagonism. On the one hand, a very strong moral ideology, especially in Prussia, but on the same time as well, this liberty, especially in big cities like Berlin, Köln, and others. So here, for example, you see as well an example of the El Dorado. It was a very big and one of the most important gay nightclubs in Berlin. Perhaps those of you who know the musical and especially the movie Cabaret from the United States that was shown in the 70s, they took a lot of ideas and scenes from the performances that were shown in the El Dorado. So there is a lot of relationship between Cabaret and the El Dorado. So it was the main address in Berlin. And you see, the photo is from 1932. So for all of you, you know, Nazis came in 1933. So just 1 year ago, it was quite calm, and homosexuals could live their normal life. And then came 1933. So when you Google online, you can see that it says that the Nazis at the beginning tolerated the homosexuals. I would say that it is not quite exact, because, you know, the Nazis had their very defined agenda and racial policy, their idea of the perfect Nazi state. And when it comes for the homosexual, it's the same thing when it comes to the Jews, the Roma, or the disabled people. They don't fit in this image. You know, the Jews, they don't fit because of the racial ideology, because of the idea of the purity of the blood. Roma, same thing. Disabled people, same idea, that because of their Aryan race needs to stay healthy. And same thing with the homosexual. What's the problem for the Nazis with the homosexual? Well, they don't fit in the idea of the typical man, because the Nazis had the problem with homosexual men. Why? Because a man needs to start a family. A man is the basis in the family of the family. So he should get a lot of children with his wife. This is the ideology of the Nazis. A man can't be homosexual. While a lesbian woman, well, she can have children, so it can be tolerated. While a homosexual man, well, he doesn't want to have children, so that's not okay. So it was a very simple racial equation from the Nazis from the beginning, from the very beginning. But we know that the persecutions started not in January 33, not already when Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, but it started gradually. And we come to the question, why? Well, this is the explanation why Nazis started to persecute the homosexuals only several months later, because one of the most important characters, most important allies of Hitler was Ernst Röhm. He was the leader of the SA, Sturmabteilung. He was the most important man for Hitler to take over the streets, to make fear the people, Hitler's power. And Röhm had a family, but he was openly gay. We know today that Hitler knew, of course, that his friend and ally was gay. And he was totally okay with it, because for Hitler, it was a political game. He was important at that time. But as soon as Hitler had the power in 33, became the boss in 33, Chancellor of Nazi Germany, he wanted to get rid, as a typical dictator, of others who could be a danger for him to his place. So this is why, with the help of Himmler, he mounted a big story against Röhm, saying, first of all, he's bought by France. France paid him 12 million Reichsmark, and he's a spy, a French spy. And to push the thing even more, he denounced his homosexuality. And this is how Hitler used the homosexuality of his, before then, most important ally, Ernst Röhm, to get rid of him, and said, you see, he is a homosexual, he's not fitting in the typical image of a Nazi man, so he has to go. And of course, he said publicly, I never knew that he was homosexual. And eventually, there was the so-called Röhm Putsch, where Röhm was arrested, and then eventually later he was killed. What happened to the homosexuals? Very quickly, only several months later, the first persecution started. First of all those bars and meeting points were closed. So for example, here you see a collage of gay and lesbian bars that all were closed. You see the pictures from before. All of them closed by the Nazis. This was the first step. So for example, you see where the photo of the El Dorado from 32, now you see it in March 33, it's already closed, and you see what you see now is policemen standing before it and propaganda for Hitler's party, because there were the elections coming up. So this is how they used this building now. What happened as well? Well, Nazis are, in this case, very efficient. So the first thing was to close all meeting points where homosexuals would meet and pressure them, make them fear, make them go away. Then they needed to go after the intellectuals, Same thing like they did with the Jewish people, pressure the intellectuals, make them go away. And you see the same thing happened as well to the homosexual. Why? The example is when it comes to Magnus Hirschfeld. Magnus Hirschfeld was a physician and one of the most prominent people in the 10th and the 20th of the 20th century who explained that homosexuality is not a disease. It's something that you're born with. And he founded a very important institute that was called Institut für Sexualwissenschaft. And of course, he was one of the first targets of the Nazis. He needed to be closed down and hunted away from the country. So what did the Nazis do? They would send in these students from the Deutsche Studentenschaft, German students, and they would go already in May in this building to close down the institute, to find all the books that they were shown as propaganda. And you have the same ideology here, like with all the literature from Jewish authors. All of this is now forbidden and needs to be destroyed. So you see, 10th May, you know the pictures of burning of the books of Jewish authors or non-Aryan authors. Well, at the same time, Nazis would burn as well all the books, for example, from the Institut für Sexualwissenschaft, who would say that homosexuality is not a crime, that it's normal. So all of this became now as well un-German, because as we recall, it wasn't fitting the racial ideology. Because when we put it down in a very basic term, this picture shows it directly. This is the image of the perfect German family. The man is an Aryan, he is blonde, blue eyes, he has a lot of children. And the woman is there in the Nazi society only to produce children. This is her sole role. And as soon a woman has 5 or more children, she gets the Mother's Cross in the Nazi society. So this was the idea. And of course, the Jews, the Roma, the disabled people, the homosexual, they don't fit in this idea. What comes then? So in the next years, the Nazis will now hunt down all the homosexual men. How they will do it? Well, this is a typical task for Heinrich Himmler and his SS and Gestapo. They would seek out for homosexuals and list them. The idea was we need to find out all the homosexuals in Nazi Germany and list them and put them away. And here you have, for example, observation photographs of a homosexual man. Where is he? What is he doing? Where is he going? Who is he meeting with? So this is how things would go. And then as soon as homosexuals would be arrested, police would pressure them to give away even more names of homosexuals. And this is how you would have thousands and thousands of names found out. In 1936, there was even a special Reichsorganisation for the homosexuals and abortion. And it was created by Heinrich Himmler. And the idea was to file and document all the homosexuals, all the homosexual men they would find. So again, you see the same thing like with the Jews or the Roma, identification, and this would be the first step before sending those people from the Reich territory, or at least in concentration camps. So again, this is a photograph of a man, and what's as well very important, this is why I put you again this paragraph, Article 175 from the Criminal Code. It was legalized. Nazis were very keen of legal foundation. There was an article in the criminal code in the Nazi Germany, so you could arrest a homosexual man because it was the law. So this is how Nazis perverted and used the law for their aim. Just a quick look on this criminal code, indecency between men. Until 35, it was written a man who commits unnatural indecency. So it's very vague. You don't know exactly what does it mean. So this is why until the Nazis, there weren't so many cases against homosexual men. But the Nazis, they would strike the unnatural, and it's already enough to have an indecency with another man. So some prosecutors and judges said, well, even if a man might look in a strange way to another man, this is already indecency. So you see how easily was it to target people, and it was enough to put people away in prison. Again, you see the perversion of the law, how you can use the law to hunt innocent people down only for moral or racial ideology. And what happened with a lot of 10,000s of homosexuals in Nazi Germany, they would put away in concentration camps, like others, like political enemies, like socials, or from other religions, or like Jews, as you see here. The homosexuals had the rose colored triangle and would put away in the concentration camps. I will show you this photo just as an example in Sachsenhausen in Eastern Germany. So this is what you would put on a photo. Again, this photo is of course a propaganda picture from the Nazis to show, of course, how bad those men are and how dangerous they are. So again, same ideology. And I chose some excerpts from a quite known text from Rudolf Höss' memoirs. It's known because of the fact that he was the chief of the camp of Auschwitz. And this is why we know him. He testified in Nuremberg at the big trial. But in his memoirs, when you look at this, he's writing a lot about homosexuals. And here you see a second, I would say, second trait in the Nazi ideology. It's not only the racial one, but the idea that homosexuality, when it comes to men, is a disease. And the job of the Nazis is to put the homosexuals in camps and try to push them and to get rid of this disease. So you see, so he's talking about re-education of the concentration camps. So they would put the homosexuals into this concentration camps, and he would say we have to put them all in one block in Sachsenhausen because it's dangerous for other men. So he's talking like they have a disease, like they would only their presence would make other men who are not homosexual. And this is why those men suffered a lot in the concentration camps, because you see, same text, same, it's still Höss. He's talking about Himmler, it's a typo here, who did even renunciation tests. And you have a lot of examples of this. It was a big taboo to speak about this after the war, but the Nazis tried in a lot of concentration camps to re-educate the homosexual, to force them to have intercourse with women. And they would say to those people, if you lose your homosexuality, then you might go free. And a lot of men suffered because of this. A lot of men died only because they wanted to stay themselves, or didn't want to accept what the Nazis pushed them to. So again, an example that especially I would say for if you're a teacher and you're working already with Hörser's text about Auschwitz, I would encourage you to see as well this ideology as well, to see that the concentration camps is here used in a pervasive way to cure the homosexuals and to force them to a certain behavior. Sorry. So I would say, yeah, if you see the numbers, this is the big problem that we have. And we encounter this with a lot of victims of Nazi Germany. We don't know exactly how much homosexuals suffered during World War II. We know that dozens of them, as you see, were in concentration camps. We know this from the lists, but unfortunately, we don't know exactly how many were killed. So as you see, for example, in Auschwitz, only 75 homosexuals received pink triangles. Of course, there were much more homosexuals in Auschwitz than this. So when it comes to numbers, it's complicated to find out exactly how many perished. And there is still a big debate when it comes to lesbians, because the traditional reading of the history always said that, as I told you, Nazis would mainly target men, homosexual men, and lesbians would be seen as women who could still have children. But in the last 20 to 30 years, we know that, of course, a lot of lesbian women would be sent to concentration camps and suffered as well. We still don't know how many of them, but newer academic works shows us as well that they were as well targeted by the Nazis, and not only homosexual men. I'd like to come back to the aftermath, because this is what shocked me the most, again, when I was a law student, is it didn't stop with World War II when it comes to homosexuals. First of all, they couldn't speak out about what happened to them after the war, because this Article 175, it still existed. It was still forbidden to have relationships between men after the war. So of course, all the crimes committed against them weren't seen as crime from the Nazis, but everybody would say, well, it's still the law, so it's okay. So until the 80s, 90s, the crimes against the homosexuals weren't recognized, neither by the German society nor by the government. It took a very long time until the German government recognized all the crimes that were committed against homosexuals, and the government would nullify the judgments against the homosexuals. So it took unfortunately, very long time. And even it was worse, because I discovered that, for example, the German Constitutional Court that we're so proud of in Germany, in 57 stated that the punishment of homosexuals is justified, that it does not violate the fundamental law, that it does not violate the basic rights of a human being. And you can't imagine, but they would argue with the same arguments as the Nazis, saying that when it comes to homosexuality between men, it's dangerous compared to women. So I was shocked. It's not taught at all in law school. You have to look for it. Another case in the 60s, the highest administrative court would strip a state employee of his job because somebody denounced him that he was tried in 44 as a homosexual and put in prison. Can you imagine? In '66, this was taken as an argument to take away a job from someone, saying you are not worthy enough. We can trust you with a job to be a federal employee. And another example, even as bad as two that I cited you, is what happened in Frankfurt in the 50s. Kurt Ronimi was a prosecutor during Nazi time, and he put hundreds of homosexuals away in prison. And you know the bad side of the story of Nazi Germany is that a lot of prosecutors and judges kept their jobs after the war. You know, we don't speak about this in Germany, but unfortunately, there is no prosecutor or judge who was put in prison or put before a court for things that he did during World War II. And one of them was Kurt Ronimi. He became a judge after the war in Frankfurt. And in the 50s, beginning of the 50s, he was obsessed of trying homosexuals. So he decided to take all the homosexual cases in his department to be able to try those people. And he had 100 of cases, and unfortunately, it needed a big scandal, a big public scandal about this to stop him. Why? Unfortunately, because of all of these proceedings, we know that at least six men killed themselves because they were in prison, and they were totally hopeless. And so only in '94, as you see, a statue was built, a memorial was built to remind not only the victims of the homosexual victims during World War II, but as well the victims after World War II. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready now to answer your questions.
Yeah, Andrej, thank you very much for your conference and giving us such new insights of this topic. I think it would be really nice if we have some questions now. I can imagine a lot of people have questions to this subject. I think maybe you can write the question in the chat so we can.
I see that Christopher Walling has a question. I mean, he raised the hand.
Okay, Christopher.
Thank you. You mentioned Ravensbrück. My mother was in Ravensbrück, and I'm confused by your language. You were talking about homosexuals. Ravensbrück, as you know, was an entirely female camp. Are you using the term homosexual broadly, or?
Andrej?
I'm sorry, I didn't speak about Ravensbrück. I spoke about Sachsenhausen. Sorry.
No, you did speak about Ravensbrück.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't meant Ravensbrück. I'm sorry. But you're totally right. You're totally right. Ravensbrück was a women camp.
Thank you.
So if I mentioned Ravensbrück, it wasn't on purpose.
How can you write a question here? Well, I can verbalize it.
Yeah, you can verbalize it. Just say it.
Last year, I was in 3 camps, Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Theresienstadt. And not once did I hear the mention of homosexuals. So I think if your purpose is to educate, I think that's a good place to start. There are so many people that are going there, and they are not exposed to that part of it.
Yeah, Melvin, I totally agree, because this is something you wouldn't see it in camps, but unfortunately, I don't see a lot of books, or when it comes to Germany, for example, I don't see it in a lot of history books for students as well. So it's a topic you wouldn't find out about it or hear about it if you are not searching for it.
Hi, my name is Matthew. I'm with the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. And we're kind of a baby institution in the United States. And fortunately, our CEO has given me the privilege of doing Pride programming every year for the Illinois Holocaust Museum. And at Theresienstadt or Terezin, there's actually a memorial there for a guy named Freddie Hirsch, who I think he was openly gay soccer coach, sports coach, who was sent from Theresienstadt eventually into Auschwitz. And he actually lived openly in Auschwitz in the family camp with his partner, and died under sad circumstances. But next time you're in Theresienstadt, Melvin, poke around and look for the Freddie Hirsch monument. And if you're bored, Google pictures of him. It's not a waste of your eyes.
Actually, I have been there twice, and I have not heard anything both times. At this stage of my life, I doubt if I'd be getting there again, but thank you for that information. And can you please repeat his name?
His name is Freddie, F-R-E-D-Y, Hirsch. And there's a beautiful documentary on him called Dear Freddie. And I highly recommend that all of you watch that. It's a beautiful insight into that particular chapter of history.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Andrej, if I could have a question for you related to expanding on a discussion of homosexuality on the Eastern Front, for example, in the Wehrmacht, and how that was seen. And as you probably know, in some of those cases, alcohol and discussions of inebriation were taken into account, in contrast to the SS, where Himmler said that was not exculpatory if you were drinking. So just it would be interesting to know a little bit more about how those attitudes, the Wehrmacht and the SS approached those.
Yeah, thank you, Edward. A good question. I would say there, like with a lot of things, there was an official line that, of course, homosexuality was forbidden, as well for SS and Wehrmacht members. But like sexual violence against women on the front, in most cases, it was tolerated. It was seen as a necessary evil. So leaders would say, okay, what happens on the front stays on the front. Rape of women is not legal, but it's okay. And same thing goes to homosexuality. And so we don't have a lot of Wehrmacht trials, Wehrmacht cases about this, I would say. But I think that, of course, there was a higher number of homosexuality or homosexual relationships than that we know. But again, this is the perversity of the Nazi system, that they always used and twisted their ideology when it comes in a good as a good mean for them. So in this case, they would close their eyes and say, no, there is no problem at all. And if you would see, even as you know, with sexual violence, older academic books, you would see that there were no issues about this. But I think there were, and this is why I think your question goes in a good direction. This topic needs to be more worked.
We have Angel Del Valle, who is the director of the Holocaust Museum in Guatemala, who has a question.
Okay, Andre, my question has to do with, well, as you know, I live in Latin America, so it's a very different context, and we are basically very ruled by religion and many other things like morality, and so in some points I see that that the persecution of gay people or homosexual people in men, especially during Second World War II, how could they, I mean, how could they identify? I mean, if you just look at someone, if you just try to identify someone, I understand, like in my environment, it's very difficult, you know, because they are very rejected by the church, you know, because we are under the church yet. But how did they really identify or make sure they were? It's very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good point. This is why they created this this whole apparatus and a police who would seek out people that they would know that they went to the clubs, for example, or gay bars, and then they would interrogate those people and pressure them, and of course an enhanced interrogation, say, okay, give us names. Give us names from other people that you know that are homosexual. So it was a pressure. It was a pressure. And what I didn't tell is that from 33 on, a lot of homosexuals tried to stay and try to hide their homosexuals. There were a lot of couples, men and women that were only pro forma, just to show the investigator, here I'm married, I'm not gay. So it was crazy, but it was the same with the Jewish people. You know, how could you see if a German is Jewish or not, or Roma? Same thing. They would interrogate people and say, okay, say us. Who do you know else? Who is a homosexual as well? And you saw is you know, even after the war, forbidden homosexual relationship is already a kiss between men. So this was enough. And even for the Nazis, they would say, okay, this man is homosexual only because the look is giving to another man. So again, their idea of homosexuality is not at all the idea that we have today.
Thank you.
I think there's a question from Adele Black. Yeah, maybe you can give us your question, Adele.
Hi, good afternoon. My father was imprisoned in Birkenau before being sent to the coal mines of Yavishevich. And he spoke, when he was alive, he spoke to us about the fact that, I guess they were the Blockelsters, the men that were in charge of the barracks, that they, in his barrack in particular, that there was, the Blockelster would take into his little private room in the back men, and my father said, of course, he believed that they were sexually abused. Has anyone ever addressed that aspect of homosexuality in Nazi Germany, or with the
Nazis? Thank you so much, Adele, for sharing this, because this is a very crucial information, because unfortunately, like I told, it was taboo to speak out about what happened in the camps when it came to sexual violence, because of sexual relationships between men were forbidden, even post-war. So nobody would see there a problem or as a crime. So of course, all what happened in the camps, survivors wouldn't speak about it, or only very later. So if you see the first books, they are written even anonymously. So because people were afraid that they might have issues.
Right.
Thank you very much for telling us.
Thank you.
Andrej, if I could ask a question, please. Would you say that for the Nazi regime, the men were more targeted than women?
Yeah, I think, men were principally targeted. For a very long time, we thought, or academics thought, only men were targeted because as I showed you, lesbian women, they could have children, And this was women for Nazis, their only purpose were having children, nothing else. This was very clear from Nazis. So this is why the lesbians were, let's say, tolerated. But with the time, we found, and scholars showed, that on certain lists of concentration camps, you could see that women who were put there were titled as lesbians, as reason why they would be put in the camp. So this might be a proof that lesbians as well were targeted, but not in the same systematical way as men. Because at the end, the men were mostly targeted because Nazis were afraid those men wouldn't have children, so homosexuals needed to be excluded from the society and put away in camps.
It seems that Matthew Seckel wants to answer or has to say something to this.
I had a question. One of the things that I noticed, and I just wondered if you could confirm or elaborate on, is that once the camps were liberated, even though they were liberated, the homosexual camp members were sent then to jail and prison. They weren't actually just liberated again because they were still in violation of German law. Could you elaborate on that?
I would say it depended. Yeah, there are some cases, yes, where because the fact is that those people who were in prison in 45 during liberation because of those charges, they wouldn't be freed, because of course the Germans would say, well, it's still illegal. But there are only few cases where people would be put away directly after then in prison, because this is why people didn't speak about this, and they hide this information because they were afraid. And this is why as I told you, the first books were written anonymously, because people were scared if they would they put their real name, they might go to prison, because somebody might say, you had forbidden relationships with a man. So thank you very much for your questions. Yeah. I invite you can write me anytime. I will put my email as well in the chat, and I can oh, sorry. Or perhaps
Andrej, if you want, I can put your
please do this.
You're from Cologne, or
any email, or the GMX email, or
okay,
any email you have from me. So you can reach out to me and we can discuss further, or if you need any material that I showed you for your class or for your studying, please, you're welcome.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, maybe last question, but I think Andrej has another class
unfortunately, I have another class. I'm so sorry. This is why but again, please write me. I will answer your question with pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrej. And for the other people, I would like to announce that the next Behind Memory conference will be on November 19th. And we invited Santiago Lopez Rodriguez from the University of Extremadura, and he will have a conference, a speech about contemporary anti-Semitism in Western Europe. So you're all invited. We will send a new flyer with all the informations to connect you via Zoom. So thank you very much for your participation, and yeah, hope to see you in 2 weeks. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Congratulations on the presentation.
Goodbye.